The second thing I want to talk about is about the way that you move your way up and down the instrument, both dynamically and with regards to changing registers. I think there's a little bit of confusion about this, and to be honest, I think I had a lot of confusion about it for a very, very long time myself. With regards to playing low and transitioning to playing high, or vice versa, I think we've all heard that faster air equals a faster pitch, because faster air equals a faster vibration, which then equals a higher note. Slower air equals a slower vibration, which equals a lower note. That's commonly accepted knowledge. The question is how do we go about compressing that air to make the air either faster or slower? And I think this is sometimes where the confusion comes into place. What I have found to be the most efficient way of doing this is to make sure that you are compressing the air primarily with the source, so the air that's actually coming from the lungs. So we have a couple of different choices for how we can compress air. We can, just from the source, blow harder or blow less hard. I have a choice to blow in this way or to blow. Those are two very different inputs. Also, we have the choice to compress the air at the point of departure. I can choose to make my lips more open or more closed. If I make my lips more closed and the amount of air that's coming from behind the lips is constant, as I close it, the air is going to get more compressed. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to be doing the vast majority of this compression work here or here? And what I find is that most people, including myself, when we get tired, the first thing we think about getting tired as brass players is that we're tired here. You rarely hear people say they're so tired of compressing air and pushing very hard from the lungs. So what you want to think about is, how can I make sure the vast majority of my work occurs coming from here, and I take less work or take more work away from the work that's trying to be done with my chops. So that begs the question, how do you work on that? And for me, I find a couple of things are very good. Most brass players do lip slurs every single day. So I think a good exercise is when you're doing your basic lip slurs. Let's say, for example, you're doing a basic 3-note slur. You're going to go, or you have a choice about how you want to move from one note to the next. I would challenge you to experiment with two different ways. Number one, play one constant wave of air, and then to go from B flat to F to B flat to D to high F and back down, move your lips to go higher, move them closer to go higher, move them more open to go lower, like this. What you'll notice when you hear that is that I am going higher, but as I go higher, the sound also gets thinner. Because as I'm going higher, if I'm squeezing the aperture more and more closed, a lesser volume of air is actually going into the instrument. And as we know, a lesser volume of air in the instrument equals a lesser volume of sound. So then try it a second way. Try to keep your aperture relatively the same the entire time, and simply move up and down the instrument by increasing the intensity of the airstream from the source by going like this, instead of closing down the aperture, and the resulting sound will be quite a bit different. I think if you practice this way, you'll find that the second route, where you change the notes by increasing the intensity of the air from the source, will result in a more even sound, and it'll also result in you having a greater amount of endurance, because more of the work is being done from the source, or from the air source, as opposed to being done on your face. The second way this relates beyond the range is, how do you play louder versus how do you play softer? And I think a lot of people, myself included for a long time, have tried to play much, much louder by simply blowing harder. But what we just talked about was that if you blow harder, you should be blowing harder to create higher notes, and more relaxed to create lower notes. Instead of thinking to blow harder to play louder, I would suggest you think of making sure that your aperture is more open as the primary input. You may blow a little bit harder in addition to that, but the first thing you should be thinking about is to make the aperture more open so that a greater volume of air actually gets into the instrument. And the reverse of this is that if you want to play softer, instead of thinking about having a more passive or timid airstream, think about blowing the necessary speed of air for the note that you want to play, but simply through a smaller hole. As a result, a lesser volume of air will actually get into the instrument, creating a softer sound. A good way of explaining this is think about it this way, if this creates any confusion for you. If I take a really, really large breath like this, and then I let that air out through the largest hole possible, I'm almost on empty, just like that. And I didn't push very hard at all, which must mean that a large volume of air has suddenly been dumped into the room without much effort whatsoever. Now the reverse, if I breathe in that same large breath, but I blow out very, very, very hard, but through a small hole, watch what happens. It takes a much longer time for all that air to get out into the room, which means even though I'm using a much greater amount of effort, the actual volume of air that's getting into the room, or in this case into the instrument, is much, much less. So don't confuse the fact that you're working hard with the idea that you're getting results. So you can combine those two things together. And if you think, for example, if you want to play an excerpt like Mahler's Third Symphony as a trombone player, this is a middle register excerpt that's supposed to be very loud. So that means your two inputs should be a very relaxed airstream, but through a hole that's very large, and that will create the sound that you want. For example, perhaps for a long time some of us have been thinking, blow harder to play louder, play more timid to play softer, squeeze really tight to play high, open up very wide to play low. If you can change those things around, I think you'll find that your playing will be much more efficient.